You're listening to Bark and Wag's 15-Minute Vet Talk. Each week, your host, Polly Requa, interviews veterinarians and individuals in the pet industry from across the nation answering pet questions. Bark and Wag podcast is produced weekly for your enjoyment, and show notes can be found at barkandwag.com under the podcast tab. That's BARKNWAG.com. Please remember to subscribe to Bark and Wag 15-Minute Vet Talk.
Welcome to Bark and Wag 15-Minute Vet Talk. I'm your host, Polly Requa. Today we're talking to Kersti Nito, professional dog trainer from Dog Training Camp USA in Raleigh, North Carolina. Welcome, Kersti.
Hey, Polly. Thanks for having me back.
So today we had another question from one of our listeners. How do I stop a dog from pulling on the leash?
Ooh, that's a really good question. And probably one of the most common behaviors that dog owners deal with. So the big thing when you're walking your dog, to me, what I always do is start out before we even get out the door. So I like to reinforce calmness every step of the way. Even if your dog is being wild and crazy and, they're jumping all over the place and excited about you holding the leash, I just calmly, matter-of-factly leash them up and ask them to sit at the door. So that way we start with like this little bit of they need to pay attention to me before we even step out through that doorway. And then when we're going for our walk, I keep them on a short leash sort of right at my side. Not tight, but just so that they have a little bit of room to walk comfortably. And that way they don't have the full 6 feet of leash to drag me down. And that's when I'm teaching a dog that. So it's not that they have to walk on a short leash forever, but until they learn that, they're supposed to walk nicely, I'm going to keep them at a shorter distance just so they're not, dragging you away. And then, if you've got probably a lab that's a big puller, I'll give them little tugs on the leash. So as we're walking, I'm reminding them, hey, pay attention to me. So it's like a quick little tug and release to get them kind of in the groove with you. So they see when the tension on the leash is released and it's loose, then they walk fine. But if they start to pull again, there's that tightness. You can do that on your flat collar, or if you're walking on a harness or whatever you like to use, is that quick little tug and release. But if you have a big puller that's just, they don't care whether you give that little tug, then what I like to do is change direction. So if, they're trying to pull one way, I've already got them on a short leash, I'm going to turn my body and move them in the opposite direction that we're going. So they have to kind of look up at me and see where I'm headed instead of them dragging me, if that makes sense. Sure. So imagine like a black lab, or just a lab. I think of labs. You've got them on that short leash, you turn your body into them and move them, and then you walk a little way and then turn again. So you're going to look silly because you're making all these directional changes, and that might take a couple of minutes before your dog is like, oh, I better look up at you because you know where you're going, and then you can have your walk again. So kind of the basics of what I do, especially to teach a dog that has had that long habit. So say it's been dragging for months and that's just how they think they're supposed to walk. Then if I'm trying to untrain that habit, I do a lot of directional changes probably before we ever go on our walk. So I might be in the driveway or in the cul-de-sac, somewhere where it's just, change direction, or I'll walk them in a circle so that I'm bumping them with my body. And I don't know if that's a good way of explaining it because it's harder to hear it than to actually show you with body language. But that directional change with the dogs, they get it because it's like if you see two other dogs running around and they bump into each other, they get that physical movement a lot better than you yelling at them or getting frustrated or whatever. That body language really speaks to them.
Yeah, and that probably simmers them down before a walk.
Yeah, so that's the big thing. It gets them focused. They know to pay attention. And that way, especially, I tell owners to start out doing your direction changes, walking your circles, and do that for a couple minutes. And then you have a more leveled walk. And then that's usually further down on your walk, you have more distractions passing by. So when those distractions come, they're already paying attention to you and in that good groove with you. So it's easier. And then another thing once they get that, oh, okay, I'm supposed to be by your side and not drag them, then they can have the whole leash and walk comfortably and sniff around or whatever, just as long as they're not dragging you away. And that, like with flexies, people that like to use the retractable leads, they get a really bad rap, and I'm not big on using them until the dog has earned it. So if your dog pulls and pulls and pulls, it's probably not good to have them on a 20-foot flexi lead.
Yeah.
But if they've learned those habits and they know how to walk politely and they aren't abusing it, then go for it and use that flexi. So that's the really big. The flexi can be like a really nice tool as long as your dog knows the rules, because otherwise it could really hurt you.
Yeah, and I still, on one of the other podcasts, you talked about having your dog sit before you walk out the door, and I do that with Maddie, because when she walks out the door, she's on high alert.
Yeah.
Like, what chipmunk is out there? What dog can I chase down? Yeah.
That's a huge thing. And even throughout your walk. So I do that to give a lot of mental exercise, but I do that sit at the door. And if they're going crazy, I'll stand there until they're giving me a little bit of eye contact and paying attention to me instead of looking at whatever else could be outside. Then invite them out. And then as you're, doing your direction changes or walking them in some circles, kind of like you do with horses, I'll also add in some sits. So we'll change direction, sit. We'll walk up to a mailbox and hold a sit for a second. We'll go a little bit farther and hold that sit maybe for 30 seconds. So it just kind of mixes it up and gives them like some drills to follow. And then they're just looking at you throughout the walk and really getting some mental exercise throughout it. So they're really fulfilled. And that way, too, you don't have to do, miles and miles of walking, unless you love, like if you love to do that, keep doing it. But a quick way to give them some mental exercise is like 10, 15 minutes of direction changes and sits, and then they're going to come inside and just want to pass out with you.
Okay, I'll have to try that.
Yeah, with my board and train dogs, with the board and train dogs in the company, that's what I teach owners. So, still do all the walks that you enjoy doing, but also have some time where you pack in just some mental exercise and a quick little walk through your neighborhood or even in your just on your street. And you're going to see a lot of that transferring over throughout your day to where they're just paying attention to you because it's a habit instead of them just doing whatever they want. And that's very fulfilling to them because most dogs are, made to work for hours, and we work their brains a little bit and they're just very happy. Okay. And then we're happy.
Yeah. Yeah. And I've noticed labs definitely like to be worked.
Yes.
Yeah. They're not idle at all.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, those are great tips. Anything else you'd like to tell our listeners regarding how to stop your dog from pulling on the leash?
I think the biggest thing one big thing is to not get frustrated. So if that's something that you're working on, start really small and focus on your successes. So don't expect to go out and do it and have like a 30-minute walk that goes really well, because then you're just going to get sick of it. And then your dog's going to know that you're frustrated, and it's just going to be this back and forth of argument. So really just start small and be genuine and try to have a good time with it too. And I think you'll see really good results that way.
Okay. Well, thank you for being on the podcast, and we look forward to having you back.
Same here. Thanks, Polly.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Bark and Wag's 15-Minute Vet Talk. If you like what you just heard, we hope you'll pass along our web address, www.barkandwag.com, to your friends and other pet owners. Have a pressing question for a veterinarian? Ask your question at barkandwag.com under the podcast tab. This has been a KFR production. Join us next time for another edition of Bark and Wag's 15-Minute Vet Talk.